All right, so we're live, I guess. Hi, today Ans Guild is hosting an event where we will talk about e-governance and DAOs as well. So we're having two guests here right now from the two different worlds. We have James from the team NEAR, who is a community manager there. And we also have Evrim, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the Leuven Public Governance Institute. Evrim is also an academic advisory board of NEADBA and also part of several networks about blockchain and artificial intelligence in Belgium. So Evrim is the research lead in several projects about blockchain funded by Bell CPO, European Commission, and Leuven University. So maybe as a warm-up, Evrim, you could just say a couple of words. What is e-governance? Why you're interested in it in its current state in Europe right now?
Thank you, Sophia. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to our conversation today. Maybe as a sort of as a starting point, my reflection could be whether the e-governance is the right term to describe the current use of digital technologies in public sector, in public governance in more particular. So because when we look to the literature or the academic use of the e-governance, we see that it refers mostly the use of information and communication technologies, and more particularly like computer and internet, to organize the exchange of between the citizens and the government there. So what we see there, the e-governance, it is not the destructive potential that we understand for the moment of the digital technologies. And well, we're to the early 2000s, actually, this new potential from digital tech, they already started to have some reflections in academia there. And we see the emergence of some new concepts like digital governance, digital government, or digital era governance. And the idea is there through this use of new technologies, some surveillance technologies or technology that they can extract data from citizens. Government was gaining back the control, which was a phenomenon in the 80s, 90s, especially in the Western countries. And that was most of the discussion of it. The government is losing control. Now the non-state actors, non-governmental actors, that they are more in power of shaping the public services and the public governance processes. So the idea was here, the use of digital technologies, it was, again, to bring back the power, the control to the government. And the government was in a better situation of by utilizing the data collected from the citizens and by utilizing different digital technologies of the delivery of public services. I believe that we are also sort of at the verge of another change, or is the need of a new understanding of the use of digital technologies in public governance. So what we see, especially with the development of the technologies with artificial intelligence, blockchain, IoT, or other sensor technologies, we see that now there are different actors, non-governmental actors, they're gaining more power in terms of how data is produced, how data is controlled, how, especially blockchain here is a democratizing, the technology here, how citizens, they can use their own data, they can control the information that they're sharing in the creation of the public service here. And without going too further, but like I think one of the also a very interesting implications of this new usage of the digital technology is the possibility of envisioning new forms of governance, like the self-governance systems, automated systems in public governance. So, and which is personally, I found it very exciting, like how the future of the public governance could be.
Interesting. Actually, I'm wondering if you would name a couple of core challenges that public sector is encountering now when talking about the use of digital technologies, like something that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, the challenges are multifaceted, and it is also to give a shorthand answer, I think, for that, like these, because the challenges, they also depends on the type of technology it's implemented in public governance. So, for example, the challenges that they're associated with AI, it's not necessarily the same with blockchain, and the solutions are therefore not the same for the type of challenges these technologies that they're bringing. But there are some I think we can draw some common areas that we can identify or cluster these challenges. The first type of challenges, of course, is technological, the dimensions there. How these technologies, they will be integrated in the service production processes. So what does it mean, for example, decision making in public policies, designing public policies, implementing public policies through the means of artificial intelligence, big data, blockchain, etc. So and it's particularly it's not only the technological dimension of it, but it's also the governance implications. Of course, it's also challenging for the public services. But we can also think about more institutional or framework conditions, challenges that are associated with the framework conditions. Very important challenges is like legislative framework. So legislative framework for the use of data, legislative framework for the pieces of the technology that they're associated with artificial intelligence, again, the blockchain, how they are going to be regulated, what will be certain accountability mechanism that's for if things they go the wrong. So there is some sort of uncertainty is also happening about this, developing this necessary legislative tools and also translation of the legislative tool in national context. Other type of challenges that we can see, these are more on the administrative dimension. So like how the administrative process that they're going to be organized. What's the implications of this technology in the administrative culture of doing business? Because we talk about disruptive technologies, but there's also this disruptive element of it, of the current business processes. So it is also not clear, of course, to everyone, what does it mean, for example, using blockchain in a public service in the processes there? What do they need to do? What are the certain trade-off conditions? There are some, of course, benefits are there, but are these benefits really worth it to go through all this transformation in the government? So these type of these challenges we can also identify there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe one, the additional challenge could be also, but again, it's not necessarily specific for the public sector, but also the skill gap. So what type of skills that are necessary in the governments? Like, who's going to provide the skills? And so like, again, like, is it going to be, from outside, from the government? What type of the control mechanism that they need to develop, etc. So the challenges are like, is a multifaceted, and the solutions of these challenges, they will be very linked to these problems as well.
I'm wondering if James is recognizing any of it in a more practical setting of crypto environment, actually, if something rings a bell.
Well, you're making me think about how politics really motivated the technological advancement of blockchain technology, introducing cryptocurrency with Bitcoin and advancing smart contracts with Ethereum. And it's really a matter of politics actually creating the necessity for blockchain governance. And you can think about how to govern a blockchain, but you can also think about how to use blockchain for governance, maybe corporate governance or actual government. So we get confused thinking about how to govern these new things, which are blockchains, and then losing that practicality of the other side, which is just taking a smart contract and using it in a regular governance process, and how that creates a lot of benefits in terms of efficiency or accountability. So I think it's a lot of fun to talk about blockchain governance and the multi-chain politics, but really the practical side is where the rubber meets the road, and it's happening already.
Mm-hmm. I think also, like, if we talk about governance in the blockchain, right, like one of the most exciting developments that the technology allows us today is the fact that it can be decentralized, right? So how actually in both of your eyes decentralization looks like, both in public governance for Evrim Tan and in blockchain for James, but I know the answer for the second one already, kind
of. All right, so I guess I'm taking note of, okay, all right. So I will try to answer this question first. First of all, like, what do we understand from decentralization in public governance context there? Because decentralization outside of IT domain or digital governance domain, it was already quite a popular, interesting the concepts in the public governance literature. So why decentralization is important or interesting for public governance? Because it brings certain information advantages in terms of the collection of information and the processing of information. And there are two particular implications of decentralization for better governance. So one of them is about improving the efficiency, this productive and allocative efficiency in the production of the public services. And the second one is about improving or democratizing the processes of public services. So by allowing citizens to engage or closing the gap between the citizen and the government. So this is one how decentralization can bring the better governance. So, however, what we know, and it's like, again, I will bring a little bit from our, the experiences from the past experiences from the literature there. While the decentralization, especially in the 80s, coming to 90s, it was a very much promoted concept by the international organizations, by the governments, and the decentralized governance is the better governance. More decentralization means like better outcomes in the public governance. Well, this was the motto and understanding. The empirical cases, especially from developing countries, they started to show that decentralization is not always it's not going to bring the best outcome, especially in the context of that institutional frameworks, they cannot really support decentralized governance. In the frameworks where there is a possible local elite capture, or this protectionist the policies in the decentralized context there, it turned out decentralization can bring some adverse effects in terms of the efficiencies or even the democratization of the process there. So what was the takeaway of this, the cases and the building up research on top of it is that decentralization is good, but there are certain underlying conditions are necessary for the better outcomes there. And these underlying conditions, they depend to institutional factors. It depends how decentralization is formulated. It depends on certain capacity conditions. So the capacity conditions of the decentralized actor, but it's also the capacity conditions that they're related with the relational capacity of the where this entity is taking place, like sociocultural, socioeconomic, the conditions there. So in that sense, and it's still, it's an ongoing research. There are still, lots of the debate is going on. What is this optimum or the optimal, the level of decentralization there? But maybe this could be some sort of, the insight from the public governance, the literature about the decentralization. I'm sure there could be some implications of it in the DAO or blockchain in the context as well.
I'd agree with that. I was preparing for this, looking at some of your research into the Turkish government and how they tried to decentralize and the impact on capacity. It was fascinating. I've heard people in my industry, blockchain space, people say decentralization just means worse. So, I think that there's a lot of negative sentiment around decentralization. It's often confusing when you're trying to explain these concepts to people who are unfamiliar with blockchain technology. Like, what is decentralized? I don't care about decentralization. This kind of thing is a challenge for us in terms of communication, not only, governance itself, but like just trying to get on the same page. So I'm never one to emphasize decentralization over the actual goals or the requirements of a system. And, I think one particular issue which might be relevant is the identity problem. So like having blockchain with real world identities brings up a ton of issues. And so I'd be curious to learn from you, like what you think about, identity and blockchain, how they fit together.
Well, all right. So the identity or the self-sovereign identity system. So decentralization in that sense. So, giving, the more power and control to the individual, the people there. So in that sense, blockchain is, and some other digital technology, but particularly blockchain technology, can also change our understanding of, in terms of how decentralization should be, formulated. So what I was talking about previously, it was more, of course, intergovernmental relations, talking about not including this digital component in terms of understanding decentralization. However, what tools that we are talking about, blockchain technologies, let's talk as a sort of umbrella concept that we can put everything in, like smart contracts, token technology, etc. So, or self-sovereign identity systems that they can, the build on top of the blockchain there. What they are bringing is, or what they can bring is solving certain frictions and problems that we can encounter in the outside of digital domain context. So, for example, principal agent problems. So in that sense, the one of the handicaps it can be brought by decentralization is the loss of control and cohesion in a specific domains. But these technologies, they actually provide solutions or partial solutions to these problems. So in that sense, these technologies actually be facilitators of more decentralized systems, where the control can be given to the individual actors, and where the system can govern itself, where the system can control itself through this the joint actions of this. The actors, of course, it depends on the incentive and governance mechanisms, but there could be an alternative forms, and as such, different implications of decentralized structures in a blockchain domain. What is limited for the moment is, of course, again, it's partially related with the challenges. What while we were discussing Sophia's question there. So there are still lots of unknowns in terms of the technological levels. So this, in terms of the security, in terms of the stability of the systems, in terms of the governance mechanism. So we are still just developing certain solutions, exploring things, and we are in a testing there. So it is difficult to say that we are there, but I believe that theoretically it's possible to have more functioning decentralized systems through the use of the blockchain technology, or on a blockchain-based systems here.
So kind of setting aside the administrative challenges and the technological challenges, digging into the legislative and more governance focused challenges, I'm curious why there is kind of a tug of war between these two particular issues with regard to identity. On one side, you see privacy being a major blocker, especially with GDPR. People don't want any personal identifiable information living on an immutable ledger, and having that be accessible to everyone is just kind of crazy, honestly. The fact we have so many public blockchains which are fully transparent is a bit wild. It's kind of a question mark to me. But on the other side, you have the problem of pseudonymity. So, having people acting anonymously or pseudonymously, that introduces a lot of challenges with money laundering, fraud, terrorism. There's all kinds of problems with that. So it's kind of this double-edged sword, you might say, or it's just kind of an impossible problem. It's there's issues on both sides, and we really just need maybe centralized governance to step in where it's necessary to alleviate concerns and gradually make progress toward a holistic view on identity for the world.
Yeah, well, if I may, there's maybe an add up there. I mean, I think we also really need to think about what this technology is bringing in terms of our understanding of centralization versus decentralization. I don't necessarily see that the alternative of more decentralized system is a more centralized system, but it could be possible of a more tailor-made formation of the decentralization of the powers there. Decentralization in certain contexts to the specific groups. Decentralization, especially if you are talking about the blockchain governance there, that affects to everyone. Maybe it could be possible every users of the system, they have the more say, or in a way of control through different voting mechanisms. Or if it is more about infrastructure related things, it could be different groups they can centralize, they can hold power. Or if there are certain risk factors or certain change the management the mechanism that they are required, certain delegated actors, they can have a more power in saying. So in that sense, because here my reflection is more about the governance and dimension there. In the technological part, privacy, yes, this is an interesting the topic. Again, there are lots of technological developments that are taking place for the moment, but there are also lots of legislative developments that are also taking place for the moment there. And I think another factor is depending on the area of application. So are we talking about is a public sector area or is it more the market area? There could be different privatization standards that can be implemented there. Here I'm always trying to to get it what is possible in theory of the technology, and what certain changes can happen to the end results. And these certain changes, again, this comes from institutional levels, because the choices of the people, whether they trust these systems, behavioral dimensions, the choices of the institutions, regulatory institutions, government institutions, market institutions, whether they trust the system, to what extent they want to preserve the privacy, whose privacy, all these elements, they are going to shape how we are going to implement these technological solutions, privacy-oriented solutions in blockchain-based systems there. So probably what we are seeing, we are going to have different ways of this technology can be implemented, where there are different privacy and decentralized structures they can be formulated in future. But I expect to see as a more diverse view here for future.
Yeah, I think trust is a big part of it. Trusting the government to manage your identity is the norm. That's the current solution, I guess. And before blockchain stuff, before smart contracts and these new possibilities, we really had a second option. It was like the root of every identity system went down to the government, and with all these different national governments interacting, that was kind of like the plurality. That's the system of the supranational identity. But going forward, we've got this alternative where you don't have to go through a national government, and you can trust a blockchain to manage your identity. And regardless of privacy issues, you can actually create your own identity system within a blockchain, which is controlled by you and controlled by your organization, maybe. So that's a crazy thought. It's just a new possibility through engineering, but we don't have the legislative framework established for this multinational identity system, or this kind of like pseudonymous identity system. So I think trust is the word. I've heard trustless architecture a lot in my day, and I think the real word is trust maximalism. So we're trying to increase trust as a goal, and trusting other governments, trusting other citizens, like other places, essentially. That's one of my goals personally, just thinking about how blockchain could achieve that outcome, like you're saying, the real change, being a more trusting global population.
I think now that we touched upon the topic of decentralization and trust, it's a good moment to switch to a very nice example, actually, of a decentralized and flexible approach to on-chain governance, so DAOs, namely, or decentralized autonomous organizations, which actually fall under the category of community governance at NEAR. So with Sputnik DAO, NEAR projects and guilds can create their own separate kind of DAOs from beneath the umbrella of the main one, which is called Sputnik. And the initial design was actually to allow anyone to apply for a fund distribution and a council of users to decide on this proposal, so whether they are valid or not. And since James is working very closely with DAOs and NEAR team, would you maybe tell us about the working mechanism behind it in a couple of lines?
Yeah, sure. The basic idea is anything you can do as an individual account on NEAR, you can do as a group using proposals with Sputnik DAO. So this council of members would vote based on policies, voting policies, and decide outcomes for these proposals. If they're approved, it's automatically executed on chain. The smart contract calls are immediately executed upon the result of a proposal being approved, and that's the mechanism. It's really simple, but it gives the power of agency to groups instead of just individuals. But the kind of use case for NEAR governance is community funding or community governance of the public goods or the resources provided to the community. And previously we had an off-chain process governing that resource, and we're bringing it on-chain using the Sputnik DAO platform. And we never liked token-weighted governance. There's a lot of blockchains with their native currency being the sort of voting power in addition to an asset for trading. So you see like one token equal one vote, and that's problematic because it devolves into a plutocratic system where the few control the many, or the resources for the many, and that's a problem because it's no different. It's really worse, and that's what we're trying to solve with Sputnik DAOs. We're not putting all the power into one specific module or one specific fund. It's a plural system, so you have all these different funds and people self-organize to make decisions, and we're gradually putting money into a variety of these DAOs, these organizations, and seeing where the various councils actually go with that resource. So in that way, we're not having like this umbrella. Even the Sputnik DAO contract is a factory, which just enables other Sputnik DAOs to be created. It's not like the main Sputnik DAO controls the other Sputnik DAOs at all. It's just a factory that runs autonomously on chain, so anyone can use it to create their own Sputnik DAO, and you can design your own voting policies based on roles. So you could have a more realistic kind of governance system that interfaces with your actual governance as it stands currently. So an organization like a government or a company might actually use this tool for decision making, and it could result in efficiency gains and other accountability. The benefits of accountability are clear because you know like who's making the proposals. They can be from the community. It doesn't have to be from an internal contributor. It could be from anyone, and then you see how votes are being made by the council members, and you see the funds being distributed and where they end up. So it's all tracked on chain. Of course, that brings up the privacy concerns I touched on earlier, but overall, it's a great solution for the lack of transparency in many governance systems.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think it was actually important for NEAR to work with DAO structures at this time? I mean, NEAR is a front runner on many domains, but why do you think DAO was an important I don't know, milestone in the development these days?
Well, it's really our shift away from the launch phase into the growth phase, and seeing our community really come to life and empowering the individual contributors to use the resources accordingly based on their purposes, which are many different purposes, all kind of united by the overall purpose of NEAR, which is just to enable creators and communities. And so, we're trying to experiment and learn with our community, and we're part of the community, of course. And so the importance really boils down into that transition. But we're seeing DAOs are a very popular use case of blockchain technology. I think it might be the sort of next big thing after the NFT craze you might have noticed recently. But DAOs on other blockchains are not really usable. They're not practical because of the fees, because they're not, really fast. You have to wait for decisions to be finalized. So NEAR gives an opportunity to really experiment with these new tools without the pains of other blockchain environments.
And I'm wondering, Evrim, how do you look actually at DAOs as a form of governance from the more academic perspective?
Absolutely, I find it very exciting, these developments and the implications of the DAOs there. And I would say, from the public administration, the literature there is almost nothing is taking place now in terms of theoretical discussions of the implications of the DAOs. But I will try to come up with in which areas DAOs that could be interesting for the government. First of all, DAOs, as I mentioned there, earlier there. So in the 90s, this decentralization or giving power, agentsifications of the government, it was quite a prominent the topic there, and we see that the emergence of lots of different organization agencies in the public sector. And in most of the organizations, or there was what was the following after that? There was a developing organizations to coordinate this decentralized formations there. The organizations that they can regulate, streamline, like sort of in custodian, the organizations as well there. So DAOs, in theory, I think it would be sort of a solution or sort of a replacement of these organizations that try to coordinate the action or that try to control in certain sectoral areas this decentralized agentified the outlook there. So I think one implications of it, of course, it depends again this loss of technological transformation, the advancements of the implementation of the blockchain technology, and what other additional features they are going to be unlocked by the use of these different tools, this technology at the same time. But I can envisage, theorize maybe in a way that DAOs can be an interesting alternative there. Secondly, DAOs also could be a new forms in terms of self-governance, or the self-governance, I mean, where the citizens groups or non-state actors, they can govern certain areas of the public services, or there could be some solution for co-production processes where the government and the non-governmental actors, citizens groups, they can share the responsibility in terms of the design and delivery of public services. And it could be possible organizing this activities through a DAO. One particular implications of DAOs could be creating a new form of automated systems, automated organizations, where even maybe the human actor is not in a position of control there, or the control of the human actor is not the way that we currently understand in the terms of the decision-making role, but again, combination of some smart contracts or AI technologies and other technologies there could be new agents in public sector, these agents, non-human agents, that they can control and govern some public goods in terms of they can I think this is also another interesting theoretical implications of it, but maybe we need to rethink and redefine what would mean non-human actors, that they can govern, make decisions, they can act as economic agents in the public domain. And what does it mean in terms of accountability of these organizations, accountability of the government, and accountability of non-state actors, that they are taking part one way or another in this DAOs.
I'd love to bring up an example and just kind of see what you think about it, because I like to use this when I'm talking about DAOs in both contexts, like thinking about how they could replace organizations or complement existing organizations, and how they help with public advocacy and citizen generated data management, this kind of thing. So I live in New York City, and I use Central Park as an example because the whole city government, manages the park. There's the Parks Department, and they hire people. It's centralized, and they're experts in managing the park. But when it comes down to a vote, let's see if we're going to elect a new mayor who really cares about the park, or if we're going to elect a mayor who doesn't care so much about the park. That's really the main choice that you have in terms of governing the park management. And then they would hire their preferred parks department, and everything like that would go smoothly if you had the good mayor who likes the park. If you don't, then it's not as good for the citizens who enjoy Central Park. So that being said, the way blockchain could make a change here would be, inviting anyone who actually goes to the park to voice their opinion or make proposals, in a different way, in a more granular way that might not have the automatic enforcement. It's not like it would be automatically executed as a decision that we were going to spend more on the park, but at least you get this data, and it's coming through an accountable system, and it's open to anyone who actually uses the park. So if you're getting some kind of like park points when you go to the park, let's just abstract the problem of how to do that. Then maybe you get more weight behind your proposals, or your decisions can be more like noticed. They can be more obvious to the whole population. So in this way, you have like the park being governed by people who actually use the park more so than just everyone who lives in New York City. And that way it's a little bit better for everyone, but maybe not. I'm curious to hear what you think about that example.
Well, of course, like for giving a particular, we are talking about the public goods there, and it doesn't necessarily mean that who is, the utilizing this public goods, or they're within the vicinity, or there are people that they are not necessarily living there. They should have a right in voting and making a decision how it should be governed there. This is more a political decision, I would say. Again, it requires for the people to make a decision. However, I think there are a couple of things that's what particularly a DAO can bring, because what you are describing as well, it is also very much associated with the use of digital technology in co-production processes. But I was there's, for example, a case in Barcelona that I'm aware of. It's one of the, to my knowledge, one of the first use case of the use of blockchain technology. It could be a base of a DAO envisioning there in a co-production process. And the city of Barcelona, they have their own this digital governance platform. It's called Decidim Barcelona. And in this project, they developed a pilot and they tested there what would happen if citizens, they can share their data, they can participate in co-production and petition processes through a distributed ledger, a DLT supported structure there. And what was the advantage of it? And this is, to my knowledge, is for the moment is not fully implemented, but it was a proof of concept that was developed there. They were able to control their data without necessarily sharing with a centralized structure of the Decidim. So in that sense, they were able to have a more privatized and a more in a a secure way of participating in political debates, because one of the initial motivations of why there was a need, or it was the consideration of using DLT in this process was, if certain decisions they become too sensitive, politically sensitive, and although there are certain assurances they can be shared with the people in terms of the protection of the identities, these are still preserved in a centralized database which can be accessed by the people. So in that sense, it was creating this sort of the pressure in the systems of like people, they were not feeling fully free of the sharing their opinions with some possible repercussions in future. In that sense, the blockchain technology, and of course the formation of blockchain technology and the formation of DAOs here, it can really improve how this participation process that they're taking place. And it's also possible to imagine how the decision making takes place, whether people, they really, through the voting, they make these decisions, whether this decision they're implemented automatically, or as you mentioned, maybe there are this gradual level of or some the checks, the mechanisms in terms of the implementation, and like creating systems, co-production process that they are really controlled by the citizens, not necessarily by the government, that they are taking the information and including citizens or non-state actors in co-production processes, in the delivery of the public services. But this process, they can be truly controlled by the beneficiaries or the citizens. So in that sense, I think this is the unique element, what the DAO and what blockchain technology can bring it there. Really taking it, or bringing the control of these processes to the actual contributors.
Yeah, I like that expression, co-production, or I think of it as like co-creation of the park. So taking the public discourse, turning it into action. So maybe there's a proposal, hey, we should clean up the park. Somebody says, hey, I'm going to go clean up the park. I'm going to spend an hour. And then they take a picture of the trash they picked up and make a proposal and say, I'd like to get paid for this. And the rest of the people say, yes, that was awesome. Thank you. And if they keep trying to do it and they're scamming, then maybe they lose out on a bunch of other opportunities, or their account is now negatively impacted. So there's a fail-safe or protection against the kind of attacks that might happen, because it is so transparent and open and inclusive. So I think that's a really good point. And the debate happening, it could be happening off chain, but just the fact it's happening in public is what we need. We need more of the public discourse, and the DAOs really, to me, are where it goes from being just politics to being actual, production. The co-production of these public goods, and how we actually improve them.
I would like to come back to the structure of DAOs. So I know that in the literature there are two camps, basically. The one that thinks that DAO in their institutional structure have more resemblance with the states or markets, so to say, and the other camp is there to say that their structure is more like the company or the firm, so more like a corporate model. So where would both of you actually allocate DAOs as a phenomenon in that spectrum?
I'd say neither, but I'll defer to you on that, because I think DAO as a term is really misleading. It's kind of a paradox, and I usually just talk about organizations or agencies instead of invoking the decentralized or autonomy.
I tend to agree with James here. I think of course, it depends how you formulate a DAO. Like when we talk about DAO, I think it's also important. You can have, I think you can, create DAOs where the humans that they're more in control in different decision-making processes, or you can have a more automated systems of DAOs. Certain rules, they can be decided in an ex ante way, and then they can be just they implemented there. So in that sense, DAOs are unique. I think it has some elements that we can associate with both governments or the nation states in terms of like, let's say, the citizens and the let's say government relationship, or is a corporate governance which has certain accountabilities and responsibilities to the shareholders, where decisions are made on behalf of these groups. So I think the short answer is that like it can resemble for both of them, but you can also create something more unique through the DAOs.
Yeah, I think they're just tools. It's just a collection of mechanisms, and there's all different kinds of DAOs. But when you think about the organization level, that's one thing, but that isn't really what most people are talking about with the DAOs. They're either trying to start a company using smart contracts, avoiding legal structure, which isn't really great, or they're trying to like start their own nation state, which is like, clearly a bit more of a challenge. But it is kind of like the pseudonymity problem we touched on earlier. It's kind of like you can do it, but what is that really, changing, or what is that helping? So, maybe there's a need for that in terms of like political arbitrage or something like that. But I'm much more interested in the practical side of how we use smart contracts for decision making, or just information management, data management by the communities around legal structures.
No, I'm super excited actually, and very happy to hear this kind of a balanced answer, because I've been reading a lot on the topic, and I saw projects dying hard to prove their point that DAO should be following one specific model and not the other one. So I think it's a nice answer that we received here. I have a kind of a provocative question for James, probably. So what I found recently, that in one of the EU blockchain observatory and forum reports, I think it was 1820, a member of European Parliament said that technology is not there yet to create a trustworthy alternative to the traditional organizational setting. Would you have any comment on that from the more technological perspective?
Well, we're going back to trustworthiness. Now, I think trustworthy is a really powerful word, because it's a very subjective thing. It's really a matter of what individuals trust. So I'd agree, for some individuals, trusting DAOs might be challenging. It might be less likely than trusting traditional organizations. But for other people, trusting these traditional organizations is less likely than trusting DAOs. So it's kind of hard to give a straight answer, but the trust in DAOs would be resulting from transparency and collaboration. So having the accountability, which is provided through DAO mechanisms, you actually build trust, in my opinion. So the idea that older or like more traditional organizations are better in terms of trustworthiness is really just a matter of perspective. And it's kind of like whether you trust yourself at the end of the day. If you don't want to trust yourself with your own data, then by all means, trust a third party organization. But you could really take control and really benefit from that control through DAOs and discover opportunities to collaborate with others who have similar goals. That's a lot more possible in this new paradigm. Otherwise, you get kind of into these siloed approaches, and everyone's trying to do similar things with slightly different strategies or projects, and really it's better to join forces, and that's kind of the ultimate goal of DAOs, in my opinion, is to like break down the barriers and get more collaboration happening.
Yeah. Evrim, any thoughts on this?
Well, what James mentioned was it was a good point, actually. So trust is a very loaded and interesting concept there. And I agree with with James' earlier comments there, because this was very common, especially in the early time of the blockchain. So this trust building technology, although then alternative ways of like confidence building technology, this has become also one of the way that's describing the added value of this technology there. But this, when we think about trust, it's not only the technology, but it's also about usability or the understanding of this technology, behavioral dimensions of trust. These are also important elements. So if the users of this technology or the designers, implementers of this technology, they cannot fully understand the implications or how to engage with this technology, then it is difficult to expect they are going to trust the results of the systems that they rely on, that because they just are told this is how it is, the system. So there's an element of maybe transition. It's required for the blockchain-based solutions and the DAOs to replace some traditional systems. So because this is also, I think it should be an important takeaway. Institutions that they're not developed in a day, like it really took centuries, quite a lot of time for them to develop, to change. And what we know from the literature, the basis of the institutional theories is that they don't drastically change. There are always some elements that they linger in the evolution and transitions of the institutions there. And this is important because now, especially in the EU level, we see different initiatives, different the policies, programs to implement the blockchain technology or other digital technologies. There's quite some the interest there. But also because of these institutions, the existing institutions there, how this technology that they are going to implement it, what does the government needs to to give up for the certain functionalities of this technology to be implemented? These are still not clear. So it is this trust is in that sense in a two-way. So also the government also does not trust in a way that to what extent they need to implement this technology, to what extent they need to give up their control of the current systems. Just maybe a small the addition here. So for example, one of the biggest initiatives that we see in the Europe for the moment is in the European Union, is the European blockchain service infrastructure. So this is a project. It is backed by the European Commission and European Blockchain the partnership. So the idea is creating a blockchain-based infrastructure to implement cross-border public services. And so now we are starting with the second the phase of this project. But for the first phase, the project suggests the verifications of the diplomas, university diplomas, or notarization services, self-sovereign identity systems. These were developed to test whether we can have that through the EPSI. So, but in the formulation of the EPSI, there were different choices how the consensus mechanism it needs to be. And the EPSI for the moment is developed on the proof of authority system. So there could be some people, they can really argue, okay, proof of authority still requires certain institutions, recognized institutions, to support a blockchain system. And now these new nodes that they are being active, these nodes they were already hold already prominent the position in the current the information systems and the data governance systems in individual countries. So they are now shifting and supporting in the more in the blockchain-based system. So in that sense, I mean, through this example, what I see is we don't see a completely disruptive change of going to the decentralized mechanisms, but there are still certain gradual shifts of trying to control the power, or trying to control in case things they go wrong. In case there's a problem, it can just trigger this the legal implications. It can trigger certain political implications of it, and I think that's normal. If you do some sort of a reflection projection for the future there, we need use cases. We need certain experimentation testing from the non-governmental sources, maybe in the governmental sources as well, through some sandbox, the base, the solutions there. But we are, I'm talking also the government itself, as a carefully taking steps towards how it could be possible in a blockchain base, and also all the associated technology base, the public sector in future.
Yeah, building on that example, I think the narrative of DAOs really hinders progress in terms of building trust with institutions, because you have people talking about this new kind of legal structure, which is confusing, and you have people talking about replacing institutions or introducing like a new nation state, which is definitely not the most trustworthy approach, in my opinion, at least. So like the skepticism around proof of authority, for example, in the blockchain space, might be necessary to continue driving progress, like resisting or like pushing back on the idea of a proof of authority consensus model is probably necessary. Otherwise, it's like everyone says, oh, this works, great, this is now a better solution, when really there's an even better solution around the corner. However, the approach, the way that we talk about these gradual improvements, I think we could do a lot better in terms of, accepting or like listening to what is being learned in the gradual process and building on that in a productive way, instead of just bashing the incremental steps toward the ultimate goal we share. And I think that's a really important takeaway. For, like you said, it's a matter of taking baby steps and learning together, and really just keeping an open mind on both sides. I think we kind of do this in everything. It's a matter of like the unknowns being a fear, or they cause fear. So we don't trust each other because we don't know we have the same goals. And if we could figure out the commonalities, then we'll do better.
I think to round up, I would say that the future looks very bright to me at least, but there is definitely, there should be paid maybe more attention to this continuous learning and learning from each other, which is, there is rarely one way to do things. So I think you're both right, and it's very interesting to hear your perspective on that, how we can learn from each other. Thank you both very much for coming today. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.